Great. Thank you for coming out on such a wet and beautiful day. We've been out in the mud now trying to work on our plots. The project is relatively new. And the focus of the research in my lab, and this is particularly, this research is actually run by Tricia Napolino, who is my graduate student, and I'm a professor at the University of Wyoming. We're looking really at some of the consequences of what seeds you might use when you're trying to restore and reclaim a landscape. And in most cases, just about every restoration and reclamation effort out there, chances are you're going to be planting seeds. And most of the seeds that are available in large quantities are commercial seed supplies that represent cultivated varieties of native species. Since many of those cultivated varieties were put through a long period of selection, chances are they don't represent the original genetic diversity that may have been in that seed source to begin with. And some of that diversity can be relevant, for example, in those plants surviving a super cold year or a drought year or whatnot. And so we've decided to go ahead and test whether or not we can prove the outcomes of using those cultivated seeds, as well as also comparing then the differences between cultivated varieties of native plants with the wild collected native plants. And the results that are listed here are based on cultivated collections, and I'll hand this over to Tricia so she can tell you a little bit about her first pilot study.
Morning. So this pilot study was actually done in the greenhouse on a bench that you can see over there. And I was looking at the differences in emergence and survival of 3 different cultivated sources for 3 different species: Polysequenda, Artemisia frigida, and Sclerotia coccinea. And I let them grow for several weeks. And you can see in the pictures here, we had actual noticeable differences by treatments for the seed source. These are the same species in the top row and then the bottom row. And then we also had differences where at least one source for each species was significantly worse than the others. And this was in a greenhouse, even where it's ideal conditions. So the idea then is to use multiple sources to see if we could buffer against the effects of getting a bad seed source. And if you got, say, for example, on the Artemisia frigida, this red line, this seed source, you'd be great. But without knowing which one's the best, if you ended up with the green, you could end up with a lot less plants than you had hoped for. So on the multiple, which is the purple in bold, you can see you end up with sort of average to high values, and it buffers against the effect of that poorly performing single seed source. But since this was a greenhouse study, we want to see how it works in actual field conditions. Still controlled though, which the plots are over there, you won't be able to see them. You'll be spared the mud stilts than walking through them. But then we have more natural variation in the weather. We can have the Wyoming wind, the cold period, everything that would be different in the different sources of the seed sources. Because they're the same species, but then for each of the species, I took one seed source from fairly distant. I got a cultivated variety from Washington State. It's in interior Washington, so still drier, but compared to some of the reclamation sites in Wyoming, very, very, very gentle. Yeah.
So then we're going to extend the research where we're actually looking at cultivated varieties and mixing the seed sources. So again, we're thinking in terms of some of these characteristics have actually been studied in agriculture in the past, but now applying them to land reclamation and restoration, with the idea being that if you're looking at the same species but adding multiple sources together, you're increasing the overall genetic diversity, and whichever is the worst, you're not going to, unfortunately, none of us have the ESP to figure that out to start, right? If you're mixing them together, you're more likely to get the plant cover that you need to meet, for example, regulatory requirements or to avoid erosion on your land. And the goal then in the future is that Trish is also going to be doing the same thing with multiple wild sources. And we imagine that in the same case, we're going to see a better outcome if we have several different populations rather than a single seed source. And perhaps if the wild sources are better adapted to the environment in which we've collected them, say the seeds that come from Sheridan are more likely to grow in Sheridan versus say seeds that might come from the Laramie area or whatnot. And we might actually see even better results with mixed sources of wild collected seed. So I suppose at this point maybe we can open it up to questions.
Will you be doing the wild seed collection with through your group, or are you just buying them?
The wild seeds are probably best collected, and what I do is I coordinate and I receive funding from the Bureau of Land Management, and they have the Seeds of Success program, which was started actually originally at the turn of the century to 2000. And with the cooperation of the Kew Botanical Garden, actually in England, and they were making an effort to collect, I believe, up to something like 25% or more seeds representing a native plant species across the globe. And so this program is actually, when I first introduced it to it, I was in Australia at the time, or working out there for a short while. And so I run a team each year with undergraduates from the University of Wyoming who get out there and who learn use their plant identification skills, and Trisha's been leading with me. Yeah.
So I have been out collecting them. I got my local seeds last summer. Probably going to grab some more from the same populations this summer, just to have more. But I was interested also in like the home site versus the away site. So I collected down in the Laramie Plains area with the idea then that the Laramie field site will be the home site for the locally adapted ones, and then the Sheridan will be the away. It's different enough in the climate that we might be able to see some differences, but I certainly don't have data yet, so I don't know for sure.
Thanks very much for your attention. And we'll be around a while longer, so if you have questions, feel free to come up and chat with us.